looking at how one journalist basically became the center of a digital hurricane
Right.
in the middle of it all.
Right.
So you've probably heard of Kiwi Farms, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's infamous, this online forum that's known for, well, let's just say they really focus on internet personalities.
Yeah, intensely.
And we're using them to kind of understand how someone like Taylor Lorenz, who you probably know is this tech columnist for the Washington Post, how she becomes like a lightning rod for all this online craziness.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like how someone becomes this character in their narrative, and not always in a good way.
Yeah, and on Kiwi Farms, they definitely don't hold back, do they? They call her a clout chaser, a hypocrite, someone who can dish out the online scrutiny but can't take it.
It's almost like they're holding up a funhouse mirror to her own work, you know? Like they're highlighting the potential harm of online exposure while they're, well, engaging in it themselves.
It's that whole pot calling the kettle black thing, but amplified by the internet, right?
Exactly, and cranked up to 11.
Okay, so one user on the forum, and this is a direct quote, wrote, "Inquisitress Taylor finds you. She decides you are guilty first, and finds or just makes up the charges later."
Wow.
Intense, right? But it really makes you think, like, what makes someone the target of this kind of relentless online scrutiny, especially in a world where the line between our digital lives and our offline lives is, like, constantly blurring?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like we're all trying to figure out the rules of this giant online game where the stakes keep getting higher.
Totally. Okay, so before we go any further, we have to hear what Lorenz herself has to say about all of this, right? Because it's easy to get caught up in that whole Kiwi Farms version of events, but she has her own story too.
Right.
And what's interesting is that the forum thread actually includes excerpts from an interview she did where she talks about her career, what motivates her, and yeah, even the online harassment she's dealt with.
Oh, wow. So it's like getting a glimpse behind the curtain then. Seeing the human side of someone who's often reduced to this caricature online.
And it's a stark contrast. In this interview, she comes across as driven, maybe a little intense, but you know what? She's also relatable.
Oh, how so?
She talks about being, and I quote, stupidly optimistic.
Stupidly optimistic.
Yeah, which is kind of wild considering all the, negativity and vitriol directed at her on Kiwi Farms.
It really makes you wonder if we're all just playing characters in each other's digital narratives, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like how much of what we see online is a true reflection of who someone is offline?
That's the question.
Yeah, it really makes you think about that.
Right. And it gets even more interesting when she talks about being like really fascinated by online communities, which, she's made a career out of covering them.
Right.
And it's almost like you can see how that fascination, that ambition to understand these spaces could be, I don't know, misinterpreted maybe by a community like Kiwi Farms because they seem to thrive on suspicion and distrust.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So it's this weird parallel, right? This desire to dissect and understand, but coming from totally different places,
Absolutely. And it really highlights how the internet can both illuminate things and totally distort them at the same time.
100%. It's like we're all part of this crazy experiment, figuring out the rules of the road in a world where what's public and what's private is constantly shifting.
All the time.
Okay. But speaking of rules, or maybe the lack thereof, one of the biggest things Kiwi Farms throws at Lorenz that she engages in doxing.
Ah, right.
And just so everyone's on the same page, we're talking about publishing someone's private info online with the intent to harass or harm them.
Yeah, good.
Super serious accusation.
For sure.
And this is where things get really complicated. Because Kiwi Farms specifically points to Lorenz's coverage of the Libs of TikTok account, where she revealed the identity of the person behind it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, they call it doxing, obviously, but Lorenz and people who, defend her, they say she was just doing her job as a journalist, shining a light on someone powerful online.
That's like, where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where's the line between holding someone accountable for what they do online and protecting their right to privacy? It's tricky.
It's incredibly tricky, and the internet just makes it harder to have those nuanced conversations,
Because everything's so black and white.
Exactly. You're either with us or against us, and there's no room for anything in between.
Right. It's exhausting. But I think that's what makes the Kiwi Farms perspective so interesting, even if it's kind of disturbing. They represent this extreme end of online scrutiny, where the traditional rules of journalism are thrown out the window in favor of, I don't know, a more vigilante approach to accountability.
Yeah, it's like they've appointed themselves judge, jury, and sometimes even executioner.
Exactly. So on the one hand, you have Lorenz, who love her, hate her, is a professional journalist working within a framework of ethics and accountability.
Even if that framework isn't perfect.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, you have this anonymous online forum that's basically taken it upon themselves to police the internet, and often with really harmful consequences.
It's like a digital mob mentality
Yeah.
where the loudest and most outraged voices often drown out any sense of reason or fairness.
Totally. And it's not always so clear cut, right? Because sometimes this kind of online, I don't know, activism can actually lead to some good changes, exposing corruption, or abuse.
Right.
But then other times it becomes straight up harassment and bullying, which obviously has real consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a lot, right? Like, where does taking responsibility for what you do online even begin, and where does it end? Especially when what happens online can have, real-world consequences.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a question people have been trying to answer forever, but the internet just throws gasoline on the fire.
Right. It's like we built this digital Wild West, and we're all playing sheriff and outlaw at the same time.
And the crazy part is, all this focus on accountability, it's like we forget to even talk about ethics.
Oh, totally.
It becomes more about punishing someone than actually making things better.
Yeah, like in the case of Taylor Lorenz, right? I mean, put aside whether you agree with her reporting, the stuff on Kiwi farms, it shows how bad this online harassment problem is.
It goes way beyond just her.
Way beyond. It's like public shaming, but online, and even more intense because it's constant.
And anonymous.
Right. Anyone can pile on. It's relentless scrutiny just tearing people apart without even thinking about them as people.
The worst part is you never know when it could be you.
Yeah.
Just one tweet, one post, and suddenly you're the target.
It's terrifying, honestly, because it makes people afraid to speak their minds.
Afraid to disagree, afraid to be themselves online.
So how do we get out of this cycle? How do
Yeah.
we make the internet a less angry, less vengeful place?
It has to start with remembering that the internet is just us.
What do you mean?
It's a reflection of us. All the good and bad stuff we do offline, it's all there online too. Our biases, our fears, our hopes, it's all reflected back at us.
So you're saying it's not about fixing the internet, but about looking at ourselves.
Exactly. Being more aware of how we act online. Do our words bring people together or tear them down?
Yeah.
Are we listening to understand or just waiting for our turn to yell?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
It's also about remembering there's another human being on the other side of the screen. They've got feelings, families, a whole life outside of whatever we see online.
It's easy to forget that sometimes.
It is, and we need to step back from this mob mentality and recognize that platforms themselves are designed to make things go viral, even if it's toxic.
So it's like the game is rigged from the start.
In a way, yeah. The algorithms, they reward outrage. They reward the most extreme voices.
So what can we even do? It feels kind of hopeless.
I hear you. It's easy to feel that way. But even if it's something small, like calling out hate when you see it, supporting journalists who are trying to do things the right way, it all adds up.
So it's about taking responsibility for the online world we're creating together.
Exactly. Even if it feels like a tiny drop in a huge ocean, all those drops from millions of people, that's how we start to turn the tide. That's how we make the internet a little more human.
That's a good note to end on. So as we sign off, we want to leave you with this. In a world where who we are online and who we are offline are becoming the same thing, how do we exist authentically? How do we build a digital world that brings out our best, not our worst? Something to think about. Until next time, happy diving!